They say every dynasty has its secrets. But the Bellamys didn't bury theirs deep enough. Some stories rot in silence. Others claw their way back through blood, screaming to be heard. In 1790 South Carolina, the Bellamy family was among the richest in the region. But behind their empire of cotton and wealth was something much older than fortune and far hungrier than man. A secret cult, a cursed bloodline, and a mansion that never lets its dead rest. What you're about to witness is not folklore. It's the last remaining trace of a truth they tried to erase from history. This is the Bellamy Curse. Subscribe now and join us before the house finds out you're listening. They say the Bellamy family built their fortune on cotton, but the soil beneath their estate was never meant for crops. It was meant for blood. The road to Bellamy House twisted through trees that looked more dead than alive. The air hung heavy with fog, low and unmoving, as though time itself refused to flow beyond the threshold of those woods. Jonathan Hale sat stiffly in the creaking carriage, hands gloved in black leather, the letter from Abraham Bellamy clutched between his fingers. Its ink had bled slightly into the parchment. The writing hurried, almost desperate. The invitation hadn't been warm. It hadn't even been personal. It was simply signed, "Come at once. Your inheritance cannot wait. A.B." He had almost ignored it. Bellamy blood meant nothing to him. Distant lineage through a forgotten uncle on his mother's side. A name whispered occasionally in childhood conversations, always laced with disapproval. Still, something about the letter had gripped him. Or maybe it was the dream that came the same night. A red hallway, a door breathing, and the feeling of being watched by someone who once knew him, long before he was born. The estate revealed itself not with grandeur, but with dread. Bellamy House loomed ahead, its white pillars now a sickly yellow, choked by ivy that wrapped like veins around a decaying corpse. A shattered cherub fountain greeted him at the gates, water long dried into rust-colored stains. Jonathan stepped down, boots pressing into gravel that crunched unnaturally beneath his weight. The driver tipped his hat and left without a word. As the carriage wheels vanished into mist, Jonathan realized he could no longer hear the birds, not even the wind. A butler, gaunt, eyes sunken into his skull, opened the door and stared at Jonathan with neither recognition nor welcome. No name, no gesture, just a hollow glance before turning into the shadows. Jonathan followed silently, his footsteps echoing in the foyer as if the house had never been walked in before. Inside, the air was colder than it had any right to be in late autumn. Oil lamps cast flickering shadows across peeling wallpaper and portraits whose eyes seemed too real, too watchful. Every step echoed like it was being heard by someone waiting just beyond view. The house smelled faintly of wax, mold, and something coppery beneath, something sharp in the nose and bitter in the throat. Lady Eleanor Bellamy greeted him in the drawing room, dressed all in deep blue lace, her long fingers clutching a glass of something too dark to be wine. Her skin was porcelain pale, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've grown, Jonathan," she said, though they had never met. Her smile was too wide, and her eyes never quite focused on his. "We feared you might not come." "I only received the letter 3 days ago," Jonathan replied, unsettled by her coldness. "Is Abraham well?" Lady Eleanor blinked slowly, like the name had to be processed. "My husband rests. He'll see you tonight." She offered no further hospitality, no food, no warmth. only silence. The servants that moved through the hallways did so without speaking. One of them, an older woman with a stitched cross at her throat, would not meet his gaze. Another stared too long before vanishing behind a curtain without a sound. Jonathan's guest room was large, furnished in faded velvet and heavy drapes. An old portrait above the fireplace depicted a man with hollow cheeks and black eyes, unnamed, but unmistakably of Bellamy blood. As he unpacked, Jonathan couldn't shake the sensation that the room had not been used in years, and yet bore traces of recent occupancy. A faint outline on the pillow, a scuff on the floor near the bed, the smell of burnt wax near the fireplace. He tried the wardrobe and found one of its drawers stuck. After tugging it open, he discovered a small, discolored ribbon, child-sized, tied in a bow, stained at the edges with something brown. He tucked it away in his coat pocket, unsure why. It felt personal, mournful. He thought of his sister for a fleeting moment, buried before her 10th birthday. But he shook the image off like cobwebs and moved to the window. From there, he could see the western edge of the estate. Beyond the trees, the outline of what looked like crumbling stone. A chapel, maybe? Or a mausoleum. He leaned closer, and for a moment, he thought he saw movement. A flicker. A red robe vanishing into the woods, then nothing. As night fell, the mansion changed. It didn't grow louder. It grew aware. The house breathed with long, slow exhalations, wood creaking under weight that should not be there. Down the hallway, he passed by a locked door with a rusted iron handle. Behind it, a sound like scratching, deliberate, rhythmic. He pressed his ear against the wood and heard humming, a child's lullaby. Then a thump. "Best not open that one," came a voice behind him. Jonathan turned to see an elderly man with a bent spine and thin white hair, leaning on a cane carved with twisted shapes. "Uncle Abraham?" Jonathan asked. "No," the man said. "Just the groundskeeper. You'll see Mr. Bellamy after supper, if the house permits it." Jonathan glanced back at the door, but the sound had stopped. The dining hall was colder than the rest of the mansion. The table stretched absurdly long for a house with no guests. Only 3 places were set. Jonathan sat between Lady Eleanor and the seat at the head, which remained empty. The meal was sparse. Thin soup, stale bread, and a cut of meat that tasted vaguely metallic. No one spoke. Jonathan tried, but his questions were met with nods or vague smiles. The servants did not reappear. The oil lamp sputtered as though gasping for air. Lady Eleanor's hands trembled as she lifted her glass. She stared at the head seat like expecting someone to arrive. Between spoonfuls, Jonathan caught his reflection in the silver. His face looked different, longer, paler, older. Or was it the light? When Abraham Bellamy finally appeared, he didn't walk. He glided, cane clicking with each step like a metronome. His face was worn beyond his years, skin paper thin over sharp bone. But his eyes, they burned with intensity, fierce and lucid. "Jonathan," he said, voice like rusted iron dragged across stone. "Blood finally returns to Bellamy House." Jonathan stood, unsettled by the man's presence. "I came because of your letter, but I don't understand." "You will," Abraham cut in. "The house will see to it. You've already begun to hear it, haven't you?" Jonathan hesitated. "The whispers?" Abraham smiled. "Good." That night, Jonathan lay awake, unable to sleep. The wind outside was still, but inside the whispers returned. Soft, breathy phrases in languages he didn't know. Footsteps creaked above his head, yet he was on the top floor. He got up and followed them, lantern in hand. He wandered the corridor, following the sounds to the end of the west wing. There, behind a door left ajar, he found a staircase he hadn't noticed before, leading upward into blackness. As he ascended, the air grew cold, metallic. The wood groaned beneath him. The attic door opened with a sigh. The room was vast, lined with covered furniture and forgotten trunks. At its center was a rocking chair, slowly moving, as if just vacated. The lantern flickered violently. In one corner, a child's doll sat upright, eyes missing, its porcelain face cracked clean down the middle. On the floor, scratches etched into the boards. Tally marks. Dozens, hundreds, all in groups of 5. Then, silence. A sharp cry echoed from below. He rushed down, heart pounding, back to his room. But at his door, Abraham stood waiting, one hand on the handle, the other clutching his cane. "You shouldn't roam just yet," Abraham said calmly. "The house remembers old footsteps. It does not like new ones." "I don't understand," Jonathan said again, breathless. "What is this place? Why bring me here?" Abraham tilted his head, expression unreadable. "You're not just here for inheritance," he said, voice low and solemn. "You're here for blood." The morning light filtered through the heavy curtains in Jonathan's room like a dying candle. It gave no warmth, only revealed the dust hanging in the air. Particles frozen mid-flight, as if time had slowed. He awoke with a dry mouth and a ringing in his ears. Not the aftermath of sleep, but like a warning. The events of the previous night played over in fragments. The footsteps in the attic, the rocking chair, Abraham's cryptic words, "You're here for blood." He dressed and stepped into the corridor. The house seemed even quieter by daylight, but not safer. The air tasted stale, like something old had been disturbed. Down the hall, a maid with hollow cheeks passed him without a glance. Her eyes glazed, lips moving silently, as if reciting a prayer he wasn't meant to hear. Compelled by a sense he couldn't name, Jonathan began to wander. He passed the grand staircase and the dining hall, its chairs still turned precisely toward the cold fireplace. The painting of Lady Eleanor on the landing above stared down at him, her expression softer than in person, but still void of warmth. He turned a corner and stopped. There it was. A thick oak door, darker than the rest, with a tarnished brass handle and 3 heavy locks. A faded plaque above it read, "E. Bellamy, 1738, 1794. The edges of the frame were stained, and the keyhole was stuffed with wax. Dust clung to it like a protective veil. No footsteps led to or from it. Jonathan ran his fingers along the edges. The wood was warm to the touch. He had heard whispers about Abraham's father, Edmund Bellamy, from old family letters. He'd supposedly gone mad in his final years, kept locked in his study, raving about those who walk beneath, in a lineage corrupted by sacred fire. No one had confirmed whether he died naturally or was silenced. Jonathan glanced around. No one in sight. He returned to the kitchen and found a rusted fireplace poker. Back at the door, he jammed it into the crack, wincing as the ancient wax broke apart like brittle bone. One lock snapped, then another. The last one resisted, until the door groaned open with a sigh that chilled his spine. Dust exploded outward. He coughed, shielding his face. The room smelled of mildew, iron, and something else, sweet like spoiled fruit. The curtains inside were drawn, leaving the space in deep shadow. He stepped in slowly. The study was larger than he expected, lined wall to wall with bookcases filled with leather-bound volumes. A wide mahogany desk sat in the center, papers still stacked atop it, untouched for decades. Candles sat melted into metal holders, and near the fireplace was a strange chair, a wooden seat with black leather straps bolted to the arms. He moved to the desk. There, resting like an artifact waiting to be found, was a thick leather-bound book. Its cover was cracked and dry, but the gold lettering was still clear. The order. A symbol had been pressed into the center. A circle surrounded by 7 triangles, each tipped with a dot. He hesitated, then opened it. The handwriting was sharp and frantic, switching between Latin, French, and a language Jonathan didn't recognize. All curves and jagged hooks. Some pages were diagrams, ritual circles, star maps, anatomical sketches. One image showed a man with a split-open chest, vines growing out of his rib cage. Another was a child, faceless, bleeding from the eyes. Something in the room shifted. Jonathan froze. The air had changed. It was heavier now, oppressive. He turned slowly and thought he saw movement near the corner bookshelf. Just a flicker. But when he stepped toward it, nothing. And then he heard it. A scream. Not in the house. Inside his mind. It pierced like a blade behind the eyes, a high-pitched wail, desperate and endless. He dropped the book, staggered back, gripping the desk for support. The scream vanished just as quickly. He stood there shaking, knuckles white. When he turned to leave, he noticed the fireplace. Symbols were carved into the bricks, crude, deep, as if someone had used a knife. Ash lay undisturbed beneath them. But the symbols, they looked fresh. One in particular, the circle of triangles, had been scratched so violently that the stone around it had cracked. Back in his room, Jonathan locked the door behind him and laid the book on the bed. He couldn't stop looking at the symbol. Something in it stirred a memory he didn't have. A feeling of falling into cold water, of someone chanting above him, holding him under. He blinked, and for a moment, the floor beneath him pulsed, as if breathing. He told himself he was tired, imagining things. The mind plays tricks. That night, Jonathan dreamed. He stood in a corridor that didn't exist, long, red-carpeted, with walls that oozed sap. At the far end, a figure stood cloaked in crimson robes, unmoving. Jonathan couldn't see its face, only a hand, gloved, reaching out. A sound followed. A child's scream, but warped, looped, echoing into itself. He awoke gasping. His room was cold. Too cold. The book was gone. He turned over the blankets, checked the floor. Nothing. He opened drawers, ripped open the wardrobe. No sign of it. The lantern on his bedside table had gone out. The room was drenched in shadow. And then he saw something on the window glass. A breath mark. As if someone had stood just inches from the pane, watching him sleep. The next morning, Jonathan couldn't eat. The house was still silent. Lady Eleanor wasn't seen. Abraham was nowhere. He wandered the west wing, searching for the study again. But when he reached the hallway, it was gone. The door had vanished. Where it once stood was now bare wall. No plaque, no outline. He stumbled back, heart racing. Had the house shifted? Or had it never existed? By evening, he was coughing. At first it was dry, then wet. A copper taste filled his mouth. He spat into the sink. Blood thick and dark. It kept coming in fits. He leaned over the basin, panting, vision blurring. He staggered to the mirror, wiping his mouth. And then he saw it. His shirt was damp. He lifted it slowly. Etched into the center of his chest, just beneath the sternum, was the same symbol from the book, the circle with 7 triangles. But it wasn't a wound. It wasn't carved. It was burned from the inside, skin discolored from within, edges pulsing faintly as if alive. No pain, no blood, just heat. The room dimmed. He backed away, fell into the chair, breath shallow. He touched the mark, and a vision erupted behind his eyes. Stone steps descending, hooded figures chanting in unison, a child's voice screaming, "Please, not me!" A candle going out, and that figure again, in red, with no face, walking slowly toward him. Then silence. Then darkness. If anything, it had deepened, not as a wound, but as a stain beneath the skin, like ink poured directly into his veins. Each time he looked at it in the mirror, it seemed to pulse slightly, like it breathed. And at night, it grew warm, not hot, just alive. He dared not show anyone, not even Abraham, whose answers came in riddles and silences, not even Lady Eleanor, who seemed at once too watchful and yet absent. The house had turned colder since the book vanished. Its halls carried a new smell, sweet rot and old ash. The air didn't move. Mirrors no longer showed him his true reflection. He began hearing things, not the whispers anymore, but muttering, as if someone prayed beneath the floorboards. Low, constant, in a language that made the back of his throat ache just from hearing it. On the 3rd morning after the mark appeared, a knock came at his door. Not the heavy kind, a soft, erratic tapping. He opened it and found one of the servants, a bent old man with a cataract in one eye and blood under his fingernails. The man grinned. "You've been touched," he said. Jonathan froze. The man motioned with a crooked finger. "The house showed you, didn't it? You heard her, same as I did. Same as we all did when the Roots woke up." Jonathan stepped into the hall cautiously. "What are you talking about?" "The harvest room," the man whispered. "It calls when the pack's near ripe." He laughed, the sound broken like dry leaves. "Come, I'll show you the mouth." Jonathan followed, despite everything in him screaming not to. They went down 2 levels, past a boarded-off servant's stair, until they reached a section of the manor he had never seen. The walls here were made of old stone, slick with condensation. Muffled thuds echoed distantly, like footsteps above or below. The servant stopped at a bricked alcove and pushed aside a tattered tapestry. Behind it, the stone wall bore a strange iron handle, embedded into mortar. He twisted it. With a low groan, a square of stone retracted inward, revealing a narrow passage descending into blackness. The old man chuckled and stepped back. "She'll find you there. She always does." And then he vanished up the stairs without another word. Jonathan took a lantern from the wall and descended. The air grew heavy with each step. The walls narrowed, wet with old moss. Cobwebs brushed his arms. Somewhere below, water dripped slowly, not from a pipe, but from stone. The smell was overpowering now, old blood and rotted incense. At the bottom, the passage opened into a large, vaulted chamber. It was circular, carved directly into the earth. The stone was ancient and pitted. 7 columns lined the room, each wrapped in carved symbols and vines. Real vines, living and pulsing faintly. At the center was a flat stone table. No, not a table. An altar. Deep grooves ran along its surface, stained black with old blood. Hooks and iron restraints jutted from its sides. Around it were relics. Animal skulls, deer, goat, horse, preserved and painted with crimson symbols. Tools hung on the walls. Curved blades, long needles, branding irons. On the far end, shelves filled with small jars, their contents unclear. He stepped closer to the altar. The moment his fingers brushed it, the lantern flared. The walls shifted, not physically, but in perception. They seemed to breathe. Jonathan staggered back. A vision seized him. He saw fields burning. A man standing shirtless in the woods, covered in blood, screaming at the sky. A child, faceless, held down on the altar as robed figures circled. Then, eyes. Giant, lidless eyes staring from beneath the earth, wet and glistening. And a voice. You repay what was given. Blood for bloom. Blood for breath. He gasped, falling to his knees. You shouldn't be here. The voice was Eleanor's. She stood at the entrance, pale as bone, a silver chain around her neck glinting in the lantern light. Her eyes were not angry, they were tired. You found it, she said, stepping into the room slowly. The house showed you. Jonathan tried to stand. What is this place? She looked at the altar. Her lips trembled. We call it the harvest room, she said. It was built long before the house, before the family was chosen. Chosen for what? She ran her fingers along the nearest pillar, tracing one of the symbols. To repay. She looked at him. They always think it's sacrifice, but it's not. Sacrifice is an offering. This is debt. A debt we can never repay in full. A promise made in blood, sealed beneath roots. Jonathan's voice trembled. To who? She closed her eyes. Vatra. The name hung in the air like soot. The lantern dimmed. In 1712, Eleanor continued, Edmund Bellamy's grandfather watched his crops wither, his children starve. He prayed, but not to God. He prayed to the land itself, and something answered. She stepped closer to Jonathan. It gave. Oh, it gave. Crops grew thick, cattle were born healthy. The rains came when needed. Gold poured from the soil. But it came with terms, not just blood, lineage. The firstborn, every third generation, must be marked. And if they do not repay, the ground opens. Jonathan looked down at the mark on his chest. You're the third, Eleanor whispered. You were always meant to come. The house called you back. He staggered backward, mouth dry. And you just allow this? Tears welled in her eyes. You think I haven't tried to break it? Every generation has tried. But the land dies when we disobey. Crops rot, water turns black. We lose children. Some are born with no faces. We do not sacrifice to gain. We repay what keeps this house standing. Jonathan felt bile rise in his throat. He turned and fled, up the stone stairs, not looking back. The house groaned as he reached the main floor, as if angry at his rejection. He burst through the corridor, disoriented, heart racing. He could no longer tell what was real. He clutched the walls as he stumbled toward the parlor, needing light, breath, sense. And then he stopped. There, seated calmly in one of the velvet chairs, was a man, dressed in 18th century clothing, pale with blood at the corner of his mouth, hollow eyes. The man from his visions. The corpse sat motionless. But its eyes, they moved. Jonathan stood at the western edge of the estate, staring at the trees. They hadn't been this close before. He was certain of it. Branches knotted like knuckles, trunks pressed together as if conspiring. And beneath their gnarled roots, small flowers bloomed, vivid crimson, petaled like knives. He knelt to touch one, and as he cut it gently with his thumb, blood seeped from the stem, not sap, not dye, blood, warm. He dropped it. Behind him, the house exhaled. News had begun to travel. That morning, while collecting air from the stables, Jonathan overheard two stable hands whispering. "The Bellamy Curse is returned," one said. "Heard it in the churchyard. No birds over their land. Chickens laying blind. It's starting again." Jonathan kept silent, but the words burrowed under his skin. Later that afternoon, he rode to town. He needed answers, real ones. Not from Eleanor, not from Abraham, and certainly not from the house. He found Father Durant at the old stone church, a man of 70 with a voice like cracked glass and a gaze too sharp for his age. They sat in the cold vestry. Light through stained glass made colored shadows dance across their faces. "You said you were a Bellamy," the priest began, folding his fingers. "That name has weight here, and not the kind you carry in gold." Jonathan placed a small envelope on the table, a letter he'd found in the attic. It was dated 1749 and bore 5 names. He said nothing as the priest read. Durant's hands trembled. "These names," he whispered. "These people vanished. 5 of them. One a blacksmith, one a midwife. All gone within weeks of each other. No signs of struggle, no bodies. Only thing they had in common was their work, all tied to the Bellamy estate." He looked up. "They say it was a sickness, but I never believed it." Jonathan leaned forward. "What do you believe?" Durant stared at him for a long moment. Then, "Some lands are cursed by what's buried, but the Bellamy land was cursed by what was fed. Over and over. Blood to the roots, flesh to the soil. Doesn't grow crops anymore. It grows hunger." Jonathan's hand twitched involuntarily. Father Durant tapped the parchment. "The family calls it tradition. But what kind of tradition demands silence and screams buried under harvest soil?" On the ride back, clouds churned above like boiling tar. Crows circled the trees, but not the house. They stopped at the edge of the estate, crying madly, then turned back. He passed the orchard, bare, but at its base, more crimson flowers bloomed. He didn't stop this time. That evening, as the storm moved in, Jonathan walked the halls restlessly. The house pulsed in his ears. A soft hum, barely audible, like someone whispering through the walls in a voice too low to understand. He passed the parlor. The corpse from days ago, the man from his vision, was gone. No one mentioned it. No sign of struggle, just gone. Jonathan moved toward the library. He had to know more. About the family, about Vatra, about himself. He pulled old ledgers and began sifting through them. Rain pelted the windows, thunder cracking distantly. Then he found it. An old journal bound in brown leather. The cover cracked when he opened it. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the date was unmistakable. 1789. The crops withered after the child was spared. The land took the cattle in place, but the earth cracked. We saw movement near the grove. Grandfather insisted another offering be made. I could not watch again. The scream lasted longer this time. She was only 13. Jonathan's stomach turned. He flipped further. Another entry. Under the harvest moon, we fed Vatra again. This time, the mark appeared on my son's chest. It bled for 3 nights. Grandfather wept. The ground shook, and the trees leaned toward the house. Vatra is pleased. The cotton returned. Prosperity came. But my dreams, I see the boy, still screaming. He shut the book, trembling. Flashes filled his vision, not memories, but borrowed echoes. He saw a field of bodies laid at the edge of the orchard. Blood poured into furrows like irrigation. A man, tall, white-bearded, face carved with guilt, raising a knife above a bound man, whose skin bore the mark Jonathan now wore. Behind the trees stood others, robed in red, faces obscured, hands raised. The chant pulsed like thunder. Vatra hungers. Vatra answers. We bleed to breathe. Jonathan stumbled back, dropping the journal. He fled the library and stormed through the corridor toward the stairs. Eleanor intercepted him. Her face was pale. You've seen the flowers, haven't you? He nodded. They bleed. She closed her eyes. They bloom only when the dead is close. It means the roots are waking. Jonathan grabbed her arm. What did you do? What did Abraham do? She looked at him, eyes glassy. Not Abraham, his grandfather, the man in your vision. He began the cycle anew. He bled the land too deeply, took from the enslaved, bound them beneath harvest moons, and whispered Vatra's name into their wounds. Jonathan stepped back. He used people? Eleanor's voice cracked. He used those who had no voice. It was how the family thrived. Sugar, cotton, gold. It all bloomed after blood. She looked toward the windows. Now, the land wants the debt repaid again. It doesn't care whose blood, only that it's old, that it's marked. Jonathan looked down at his chest. The symbol pulsed beneath his shirt, a faint warmth rising with each heartbeat. What happens if I refuse? He asked. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Then the roots break the house from below. Thunder boomed overhead. The glass trembled. They both turned toward the sound. Somewhere near the back of the estate, the ground let out a low, wet groan. Jonathan ran. He sprinted through the corridor, past the old grandfather clock, through the kitchen, into the back gardens. The storm was in full roar now. Rain lashed the earth, wind howling through trees that bent like they wanted to fall inward. And then he saw it. Beyond the flowers, past the old burial grove, the ground moved. Not just shifted, rose, sank, breathed. The earth was alive. The vines pulsing across the lawn twisted as if in pain. One of the flowers exploded in a spray of red mist. The earth cracked, a thin line tearing open like a mouth. Beneath it, something gleamed, wet, pale, like flesh beneath the soil. Jonathan dropped to his knees. The chanting rose in his ears again, deafening now. Vatra hungers. The blood must return. The debt never dies. he screamed. And the earth inhaled. The rain had returned. It fell in soft sheets against the old glass windows of Bellamy House, a steady hiss like whispers just beyond the walls. Jonathan sat at the edge of his bed, eyes hollow, skin pale. The mark on his chest no longer itched. It burned. Quietly. Constantly. He hadn't slept in 2 days. When he closed his eyes, he spoke in voices not his own. Words that bent his jaw into unfamiliar shapes. Latin, Greek, something older. Once he woke mid-sentence, speaking a phrase he couldn't remember learning. The candle by his bedside had gone out. The window had been open, and something had breathed on his neck. Tonight, Eleanor came to him. She looked thinner, her hair unpinned, her eyes rimmed red. She stood in the doorway for a long time before entering, as though afraid the room would swallow her whole. "I was never supposed to stay this long," she said softly. Jonathan blinked. "What?" "I married into this family. I was never a Bellamy. Not by blood, not by curse." She sat in the chair near the fireplace, back straight, hands folded in her lap. Her lips trembled, but she forced herself still. "They told me the house had history, that the Bellamys were strange but brilliant, that the land was rich, and I believed it all. I was 19, in love, or something like it. Abraham's father, he was powerful, not cruel but cold. I thought I could change that." Jonathan watched her closely. Her fingers dug into her palms. "It started after my child was born." Her voice grew hollow. He was perfect, small, quiet, black hair like his father. But then one night, the fire in the nursery went out. I remember because I heard the wind change. It whistled like a flute. When I walked in, she closed her eyes. The crib was full of feathers, not soft ones, sharp, wet, red, and teeth, dozens of them, human teeth, baby teeth, all scattered like seeds. Jonathan shivered, and he was gone. For 2 days, no one spoke, no one helped. Abraham said nothing, just locked himself in the cellar. When the child came back, he was whole, smiling, but her hands trembled. His eyes weren't the same. Jonathan felt cold seep into his spine. "What do you mean?" "I mean they weren't human." She turned to him. "I don't think Abraham's ever been human. Not fully. I think whatever was summoned during that ritual, Vatra, it didn't just take something. It gave something back. It seeded its blood in our family." Jonathan looked away. His skin had gone gray in patches. His gums bled. He couldn't feel his fingertips anymore. And every time he looked into a mirror, his reflection blinked a moment too late. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked. "Because you're next." She stood slowly, walked toward the fireplace, and pulled a long, thin box from the mantel. Inside was a collection of old letters, photographs, and brittle parchment stained with age. She handed them to him. "These are the original rites," she whispered. "Instructions. The line must be maintained. The marked one must bleed willingly, or the land will take instead." Jonathan opened one of the pages. The script was jagged, in a language older than Latin. One phrase was circled over and over in dried blood. "Et in carne eius, radixes habitabunt." And in his flesh the roots shall dwell. He clutched his chest. "I'm being changed," he muttered. "Yes," Eleanor said. "Into what?" She didn't answer. Outside, the storm rose. Thunder cracked. The wind shrieked through the chimney, scattering ash across the hearth. Jonathan coughed again. More blood. He wiped his lips and saw something else this time. A piece of black root in the tissue, pulsing faintly before curling and dissolving. Eleanor knelt beside him. I begged them not to mark you, but they said the pact was too old, too deep. Abraham never wanted to be a man. He wants to be eternal. She touched his face gently. The house is preparing you. It's reshaping your body for the offering. Jonathan pulled away. I'm not a sacrifice. You're not, she whispered. You're the vessel. Her hands trembled as she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver knife. Then help me stop it, Jonathan said. Tell me what to do. Burn the altar. Destroy the symbol. Whatever it is. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. You don't understand. The ritual's already begun. The moment you stepped on the land, the mark began to bloom. You were always going to end here. Jonathan stood. Then why come to me now? Why tell me this? What am I supposed to do with any of it? She looked up at him, a strange calm settling over her face. You're supposed to be alone now. She raised the knife. Eleanor. Without hesitation, she drew the blade across her throat in one swift, practiced motion. Blood sprayed across the floor. She fell to her knees, gurgling, eyes locked on his. Her body shook once, then went still. But she was smiling, wide, empty, at peace. Jonathan backed away, heart hammering. He tried to scream, but found his throat raw, dry, stolen by fear. He stumbled from the room, blood on his hands, the knife clattering behind him. Down the hall, the house seemed to sigh. The house had grown quieter, not in the way of peace, but like a breath held too long, like something waiting to exhale. Jonathan walked the halls with a lantern clutched in both hands, footsteps muted by thick carpets soaked in age and ash. He hadn't seen a servant in over a day. Rooms that once bustled with quiet routine were now sealed shut. The bells no longer chimed. Food no longer appeared. The only thing that moved were the portraits. He noticed it first with a painting above the main stairwell. Abraham's great-grandfather, mouth once a grim line, now slightly curled upward, eyes narrowed in what resembled amusement. The next day, the woman beside the library, an aunt, he thought, had shifted her head to the left. The third morning, a boy's painting on the east wall raised its hand in a faint gesture. Jonathan stopped looking at the paintings altogether. Instead, he turned to the walls. He had begun searching for anything the family might have hidden. Books, scrolls, relics. Something to explain what he was becoming. Why his veins now pulsed with heat. Why his reflection grinned without him. It was in the nursery where he found it. Beneath the cradle with the broken rocking peg. A loose floorboard. He pried it up with a fire iron, and beneath it lay a velvet-wrapped bundle tied with black twine. The fabric crumbled in his hands, eaten by damp and age. Inside was a scroll, sealed with red wax that bore the Bellamy crest, the tree with bleeding roots. He unrolled it carefully. The parchment was dense with text written in an archaic hand. The ink shimmered faintly. In the center, in bold scarlet lettering, The red sermon. He read aloud, haltingly. Let the land die, so it may rise. Let the ash bear bloom. Let the rot yield gold. Let blood feed breath. From the marrow of the market shall prosperity spring. Dance beneath the harvest moon. Offer what was given, and you shall receive what was taken. His hands trembled. The sermon was a manual, a contract. The ritual was not merely symbolic. It was transactional, a cosmic trade. Blood for wealth, death for legacy. He stared at the words until they blurred. Outside, the crows screamed. They had been circling for hours now, never landing, never resting. Dozens of them, maybe more. They wheeled endlessly over the estate, a living storm of black feathers and rage. Their cries pierced the silence like rusted knives. Jonathan barely noticed anymore. He stumbled down the corridor, scroll clutched to his chest. As he passed the grand dining room, he stopped. It was empty. The long table, once lined with silver and crystal, now lay bare. Chairs upturned. Dust covered the plates. And above it all, a new portrait, one he had not seen before, of a man in red robes, face hidden, standing over a pit. Beneath the painting was a brass plaque. The first harvest. Jonathan stepped away. He moved toward the kitchen, hoping for any sign of life. The door creaked as he opened it. Nothing. Pots still hung, fire cold. No cooks, no knives, no footsteps. Just the steady drip of something. Water or blood, he couldn't tell, onto the stone floor. He turned away and ran. Through the hall, out the side door, across the overgrown garden to the grove where the ground had breathed. He could feel it now, pulsing below, like a second heartbeat under his feet. He began to dig. He didn't know why. Perhaps instinct, perhaps madness. But something in him said dig. Find what's been buried. Understand what they fed to the roots. He found the shovel in the tool shed. Rusted, heavy. He stabbed the soil, hands blistering with each thrust. The dirt gave way easier than it should have. Soft, loamy, rich with decay. Worms crawled along the handle. The wind howled above. An hour passed. Then another. Then a sound. Crack, not stone, not wood, bone. He dropped to his knees and scraped away the last of the soil with his bare hands. Tiny skulls. Dozens. No, more than that. Infants. Small skeletons stacked atop one another, bones fused by time and moisture. Some still bore faint cloth rags, torn and blackened. Others had jawbones split open, as if from screaming. He recoiled. The earth reeked of old blood and milk. He felt his gorge rise and turned to vomit behind him. Red again, flecked with bits of black root. His vision blurred. He turned back, dizzy, and in the low light of the grave, he saw something even worse. The skeletons were not still. They shifted, slightly, like something below them was still breathing or feeding. A voice cut through the silence. "You dug too deep." Jonathan froze. He turned slowly, already knowing who stood behind him. Abraham Bellamy. Tall, dressed in a black coat trimmed in red, hands gloved, eyes hollow, not cruel, not angry, but deeply, terribly calm. You weren't supposed to see this part, Abraham said softly. It's better when it's just a story. Easier to swallow when the bones stay buried. Jonathan rose slowly, the shovels shaking in his grip. What is this? Abraham stepped closer. The price for what we have, for what we've built. Every child here was meant for it, born into it, fed to the roots so the tree could bloom. He looked up at the swirling sky. The land grows sweet when it's full. That's the rule, always has been. Jonathan's voice cracked. You're a monster. Abraham shrugged. I'm a farmer. You plant, you harvest. The Bellamys. We just learned early what the land really wants. He took another step. And now, it wants you. Jonathan raised the shovel. I'm not dying for your gods. Abraham smiled faintly. Who said anything about dying? He gestured to the bones behind them. They died. You will become. Jonathan stepped back. Tomorrow, Abraham said, we dance beneath the blood moon. For Vatra, for the red sermon, and for you. His voice dropped to a whisper. Your place is ready. The bells tolled at midnight, not the chapel bells of the nearby town. These rang from deep within the walls of Bellamy House. Chimes no longer made of metal, but bone. Hollow and slow. Jonathan woke to the sound and found himself not in his room, but on the cold stone floor of the harvest room. His wrists were bound in velvet straps. He had been dressed in ceremonial robes, deep crimson, stitched with gold thread, and lined in symbols he didn't recognize. They shimmered faintly in the candlelight, as though alive. A circle of robed figures surrounded him. Hooded, silent, dozens of them. They moved not as individuals, but like one breathing body. Abraham Bellamy stood above the altar. His robe was black, the only one. In his hand, a staff of twisted root. At his feet, an old tome bound in skin and nailed shut with iron pins. The harvest room stank of copper, mold, and blood. Jonathan struggled. The straps held fast. His head swam. Something had been poured down his throat. A bitter oil, thick and dark, which dulled his limbs and turned his vision to liquid. Abraham raised his arms. Brothers and sisters, blood of my blood, we have waited long for this. The cult responded in one voice, low and guttural. The soil has been fed. The roots have remembered. Abraham looked down at Jonathan. My flesh wanes. My blood grows thin, but through the market I shall bloom again. Through him our harvest shall be eternal. He opened the book. The iron pins peeled away on their own, one by one, with a sound like teeth snapping. The pages turned in a wind that didn't exist. The symbols glowed red, then violet. Jonathan thrashed, screaming. You're insane. You can't do this. Abraham smiled. Your bloodline was always meant to carry the seed. It is an honor to be chosen. Two cultists stepped forward and slit Jonathan's palm. The blood was caught in a silver bowl, then mixed with ash and something green, moss or rot. The paste was smeared across his chest, over the old mark, which hissed as if burned. Then Abraham began the chant. Vatra venit, Vatra mane, Vatra renascitur in carne. The candles burned blue. The walls groaned. Jonathan felt his body rise slightly from the altar. Not lifted by hands, but by force, like something beneath the room had exhaled upward. His eyes rolled back. His tongue moved without him. He spoke in unholy syllables. Time warped. The flicker of candlelight stretched into threads of flame that painted sigils in the air. The cult chanted louder. Abraham's hands shook. The symbols carved into Jonathan's skin began to glow. And then, the sound of the ritual changed. The flame dimmed. A wind, sudden and sour, blew through the chamber. Candles extinguished, one by one. The cult fell silent. Jonathan's body dropped to the altar with a thud. The circle shuddered. A voice spoke. But not in Latin, not in any human tongue. It came from the walls, from beneath the altar, from within their bones. A language of hunger and bone, of ash and flame. He is unripe. The walls cracked, the ceiling rumbled. His blood is thin, his root broken. Abraham dropped to his knees. No! He is marked! He is chosen! The voice boomed. He is impure. A second later, the altar split in half. The stone cracked down the middle, exposing a pit below. Black, wet, pulsing. Something moved inside. A limb, a jaw. It was too massive, too wrong to describe. Whatever it was, it writhed. The cultists screamed. Some ran, others collapsed, their robes dissolving into blood and smoke. One by one, their voices joined the screaming choir echoing from below. Jonathan crawled from the altar, vision swimming. He turned and saw Abraham still kneeling, tears streaming down his cheeks. I gave you everything, Abraham whispered. I bled generations for you. From the pit, something laughed. A horrible, hollow laugh, like wind whistling through skulls. The roots in the walls burst through the stone, wrapping around the columns, the floor, the dead. Blood poured upward instead of down. The floor quaked. Then the house above split open. Stone groaned. Walls cracked. Beams snapped like ribs. Jonathan stumbled toward the stairwell. The cultists were gone. The candles flickered like dying stars. As he climbed, a roar shook the chamber, a sound no creature should make. He looked back once. The harvest room was no longer a room. It was a mouth. And something vast, red, and alive was crawling upward through the estate. The world split open. A deafening crack thundered through Bellamy House as the altar shattered and the earth beneath gave way. Jonathan screamed, or thought he did, as gravity vanished and stone crumbled. A sea of heat and ash swallowed him. He fell, spinning through smoke and shrieks and the scent of burning flesh. For a moment, all was weightless silence. Then came the impact. Jonathan landed hard on slick stone. The breath knocked from his lungs. His body writhed, aching from the fall, but somehow intact. He opened his eyes and stared up through a jagged crevice where the mansion once stood. Now only fractured beams and firelit smoke. Screams echoed above and below. When he turned, he saw the ruin. A vast subterranean chamber stretched out before him, ancient and half-drowned in black water. The ceiling arched impossibly high, supported by cracked pillars carved in spirals. Winged statues stood along the walls, faceless, humanoid, looming like judges. Their wings were folded inward, as if shielding themselves from what lingered here. Everything was wet. The floor shimmered with a film of blood. The walls bled in rivulets. The air reeked of rot, copper, and centuries of decay. Somewhere in the distance, a slow heartbeat pulsed. Not his own. He staggered to his feet. Stone altars lay in rows, each one covered in carvings older than Scripture. Not Latin, not Greek. Something older. Symbols that looked like vines, roots, veins. He reached out to touch one, and the stone pulsed beneath his fingers, warm and alive. He recoiled. Then the whispers began. Soft at first, like breath against the ear, then louder, sharper, accusatory. You have always been here. The soil knew your name before your birth. You are the seed. You are the fruit. Jonathan clutched his head. His skull throbbed. Visions exploded behind his eyes, memories not his own. A hand signing parchment in blood. A woman screaming in childbirth beneath a blood moon. A red-robed priest chanting over a newborn buried in ash. He fell to his knees. The ruins spun around him, and the statues began to move. Not physically, but subtly. Their posture shifted, their wings now slightly parted. One raised its finger, another tilted its head. They watched. He crawled forward, slipping on the wet stone. A mural stretched across the wall, half-faded but unmistakable in its horror. It showed a man, Abraham Bellamy, standing at the edge of a pit. Behind him, a winged figure. Beneath him, chained children. The man cut open his palm, and from the wound sprouted a tree, black and twisted. Jonathan's vision blurred. His hands trembled. He touched the mural, and the world split again. Suddenly, he was no longer in the ruin. He was in the past. He stood in the original Bellamy estate. Smaller, wooden, freshly built. Around him, farmers bowed. Slaves knelt. A priest read from the red sermon. And in the shadows stood himself. No, not himself. Abraham. He turned to look into the mirror above the fireplace and saw Abraham's face. Worn, proud, cruel, staring back. Jonathan staggered back. The memory dissolved, but its imprint remained. His skin burned with recognition. His fingertips tingled. Blood oozed from his nose, thick and black. He screamed into the dark, "I'm not him! I'm not him!" The ruin answered with silence. He fled down a corridor lined with low arches, each more narrow than the last. As he ran, the walls tightened. The air thickened. And the memories returned. A sacrifice beneath the new moon. A pact written on skin. A woman buried alive, with a branch through her heart. A child torn from the womb, mid-birth, marked by flame. And a man, laughing, always laughing. Jonathan collapsed near a circular chamber that pulsed with light. In its center stood a tree, or what had once been a tree, now fossilized, black and slick with blood. It had grown upside down, roots reaching toward the ceiling. Beneath it, the bones of hundreds. He crawled forward. In the bark, names were carved. His name, Jonathan Hale. Over it, scratched out, another name, Abraham Bellamy. He vomited. The air grew colder. The voices returned. You are not reborn. You are the vessel. What he cannot become, you will. You are soil. You are root. You are blood. Jonathan clutched his face, sobbing. His skin felt wrong. Loose, soft, not his. His eyes blurred. When he looked into the pool beside the roots, he saw his own reflection split. One side him, the other Abraham, grinning wide. He screamed. He tried to tear the image from his mind, but it clung to him. He scratched at his cheeks, tore skin with broken nails. Blood dripped down his jaw. I was never meant to come here. His voice echoed, cracked, fading. He collapsed beside the altar of roots, body shaking. Above him, the ruin trembled. Something deep within the earth stirred again, shifting like a beast beneath sheets. The statues exhaled dust. The murals cracked. And somewhere behind the veil of the ruin, something opened its eyes. The house was burning. Not just the walls or the roof, but the house itself, the soul of it, the bones, the ancient things buried beneath. Fire licked up through the floorboards, howling like a wounded beast. Smoke poured from the shattered windows, and the once grand spire collapsed in a hiss of ash. And yet, the mansion didn't die. It screamed. Jonathan stumbled through the hallway, dragging one leg behind him. His robes had long since caught flame, burned away, revealing skin blackened with soot and blood. His face was barely human now, pale, veined, cracked like drying parchment. He wasn't sure if he was alive anymore. The doors swung open and shut without cause. Paintings bled, mirrors rippled. Every inch of the mansion moaned. Somewhere beneath the floor, something vast and red still breathed, curling its tendrils through the foundation like roots tasting blood. Outside, the fog had thickened. The few survivors, cultists, servants, maybe even other Bellamys, screamed as they ran, vanishing into the gray. But no matter where they turned, they reappeared. In the orchard, on the front steps, at the edge of the swamp. The fog bent the land, rewrote direction, ate sound. Jonathan burst through the side door, coughing blood, and staggered into the garden, hoping for the road, for the gate, for the world beyond. But the garden was gone. Trees twisted unnaturally, flowers bled. The sky above pulsed like flesh under fire. Still, he ran. He pushed through the thorned hedges, past the dried-up fountain, down the crumbling path. The trees grew taller. The wind fell silent. Then, there it was, the front gate, still intact, iron and oak. He reached for the latch with blistered fingers, pulled. It opened. Freedom. He stumbled forward into the mist and froze. A carriage was approaching, horse-drawn, lantern swaying. The hooves thudded slowly. A figure leaned from the window, squinting through the gloom. Jonathan's blood froze. It was himself. Not burned, not bloodied. Dressed in the same traveling coat, carrying the same letter from Abraham Bellamy. He watched as this other him stepped down, looked up at the house with nervous curiosity, and walked toward it. The fog swallowed him whole. Jonathan stood there, breath shallow, paralyzed. Then a voice behind him said, "It always begins the same." He turned, but no one was there. He spun back to the gate. Now it was gone, or he was gone, or the world was gone. Everything spun. The ground lurched. He fell backward into the mist. When he opened his eyes, he was standing at the gate again, and the carriage was arriving. Again. He screamed, a raw, broken sound. He ran, but his feet led him back. No matter which path he took, it led him to the same cursed loop. Sometimes he was already walking toward the house. Sometimes he watched from the garden. Sometimes he stood behind the reflection in a mirror. Time unraveled. He saw himself dozens of times, each one unaware, hopeful, curious. Some were pulled into the house, some burned, some vanished. Each was him, or was becoming him. The realization hit him like a blade in the gut. The Bellamy Curse wasn't a haunting. It was a machine, a cycle, a trap. a mouth that ate bloodlines and memory. You didn't just enter Bellamy House. You became part of it. Jonathan stumbled through the ruined halls again. The fog seeped through the walls. Paintings wept. Rooms shifted. The library was now the cellar now the chapel. He passed the same corpse 3 times. Each time it aged further. He came to what used to be his bedroom. Now it was stone, bare, cold. In the center sat a desk. Upon it, a journal. Bound in cracked leather, a pen, a single candle. He stared. A voice whispered in his skull. One always writes. One always leaves the record. His hands moved without thought. He sat, opened the journal, began to write. He didn't know how long he wrote. Minutes, hours, centuries. But when he blinked, the pages were full. His handwriting, but foreign to him. Words poured from a place deeper than memory. The final page read, "If you are reading this, you are already part of it. You opened the door. You breathed the air. You let the house inside you. This place will never let you leave, unless you destroy it. The curse is sealed in flesh. Burn this place. Burn us all." He stared at the words, heart pounding. Then he saw it. The mirror. Across the room, cracked and warped, a reflection shimmered. Jonathan looked into it. His reflection looked back, then smiled. Not with his mouth, not with his face, but deeper. A grin that twisted his bones, that bent his shape slightly. Wrong. Jonathan stood. The reflection stood. He raised his hand. The reflection raised it first. He stepped closer, and the mirror rippled. He opened his mouth to scream, and disappeared. No sound. No flash. No body. Just gone. The journal sat on the table, still open. The candle flickered, and the house breathed. Charleston, present day. Dr. Emery Vaughn stood ankle-deep in ash. The library had been closed for decades, gutted by fire in 1972, left to rot under vines and silence. It had once belonged to the Charleston Historical Preservation Society, but now it was little more than scorched timbers and sunlit dust motes. A forgotten corpse. Yet something had brought him here. He didn't know why, only that when he touched the burnt iron key he'd found in an auction box, he dreamed of crows, 1,000 of them, perched on a gate, watching, waiting. Now here he was, standing in the belly of the ruined archive, breathing in smoke that hadn't risen in half a century. He swept away charred debris with his boot. Something was off about the northern wall. The bricks uneven, the soot strangely absent in a rectangular shape. He reached forward and tapped, hollow. He grabbed a crowbar and dug into the seams. With a sharp creak, the false panel broke free, revealing a narrow compartment. Inside sat a single item, a leather-bound journal, scorched along the edges, the spine nearly split from heat. Its cover was stamped with a single symbol, a tree growing from a bleeding wound. He opened it. The handwriting inside was frantic, slanted, sometimes blood-stained. The entries were dated 1790. A name appeared repeatedly. Jonathan Hale. The pages spoke of a mansion, of inheritance, of whispers and symbols, and something called Vatra. The deeper Emery read, the more his stomach knotted. Names of cults, rooms with no exits, a mother smiling as she slit her throat. A family born not from love, but from pact. It couldn't be real. It had to be fiction. Then came the page that read, "If you're reading this, then you're already part of the curse." Emery laughed uneasily, snapped the journal shut, and turned to leave. But the hallway had changed. Where the exit had been, now stood a mirror. Cracked, fogged, old. His own reflection stared back, except the background was different. In the reflection, the walls were red. There were no windows. The flickering light was not daylight. Behind his reflection stood a woman. Her throat was slashed, stitched crudely. She smiled with too many teeth. Emery spun around. No one there. His chest tightened. He backed away and hit a chair. Papers flew. One drifted down, yellowed and scorched. A sketch of the Bellamy estate. He hadn't seen it in the journal before. He flipped the pages again. The handwriting had changed. Now it read, "Dr. Emery Vaughn, stop reading." He dropped the book. Then came the crows. Hundreds outside, perching on the broken window frame. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dusk. They didn't move. They watched. The temperature dropped. From beneath the floorboards, fog seeped in. A whisper came from inside the walls. "Votre venit, votre manet." He couldn't breathe. He grabbed the journal, intending to burn it, but the pages refused to light. They curled, but did not blacken. The ink shimmered, resisting. The cover pulsed faintly in his hands. He flipped to the final page. It was fresh, still wet, written in handwriting he didn't recognize, but felt like his own. "Close this book. Do not look into their eyes. Do not answer the whisper. They're already inside the walls." The last word bled across the page, the ink pulsing, alive. WALLS. And then he heard a knock, behind him, in front of him, inside him. He looked into the mirror one last time, and his reflection grinned. But he didn't. The journal dropped to the floor, and Dr. Emery Vaughn was never seen again. You shouldn't have come this far. But you did. You turned every page. You followed Jonathan Hale into the fire. You walked through Bellamy's halls. You opened the journal. And now, it knows you. That creaking in your ceiling, that whisper through the vent, that mirror that doesn't quite reflect you anymore. That's not your imagination. That's them. So heed the final warning. Do not look into their eyes. Do not answer the whisper. Do not follow the crows, because you've read too much. And now, they're already inside your walls.